The train station at Redemption Creek smelled like coal smoke and broken dreams. It was the kind of place where people arrived full of hope and left with nothing but dust on their boots and questions they couldn't answer. But on the afternoon of September 14th, 1883, something happened at that station that the old-timers would still be whispering about 20 years later. A woman stood alone on the platform. No luggage, no one waiting, just a single letter clutched in her trembling hand. A letter that had just destroyed everything she thought her life was going to be. She had traveled 3 days by rail. 3 days across scorching desert and empty plains, through towns with no names and rivers with no water. She had sold almost everything she owned to make that journey. And the man she had come to marry wasn't there. Instead, there was a note, left with the station master. For words, written in careless ink. I changed my mind. She stood there so still that people actually walked around her like she was a fence post. Like she wasn't even real. Like her pain was invisible. But one man saw her. He was leaning against the far wall of the station. A worn hat pulled low over his eyes. 2 sleeping children pressed against his sides like they'd grown there. And something about the way he watched her, quiet, steady, like he understood exactly what it felt like to be left behind, would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Sending love your way. Drop it in the comments. This community means everything. Now, let's go back to that platform. And let's tell the whole story. Her name was Clara May Sutton. She was 26 years old, and she had what people in those days called good bones. Strong cheekbones, clear eyes the color of winter sky, hands that looked like they knew how to work. She wasn't the kind of beautiful that made men stop in the street. She was the kind of beautiful that crept up on you slowly, the kind you noticed on the 3rd or 4th look. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio called Millhaven, where her father ran a dry goods store and her mother made the best apple pie in 3 counties. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was steady, safe. Then her father's store burned down. Then her mother got sick. Then the money ran out. Clara had done what a lot of women did in those years when the walls closed in. She answered an advertisement in the newspaper. Matrimonial notices, they called them. Men out west. Men with land and cattle and futures. Men who needed wives and weren't ashamed to say so. She had written to 12 men. Only one wrote back more than twice. His name was Gerald Fitch. He was a rancher outside Redemption Creek, Nevada. He wrote good letters, careful, thoughtful letters, the kind that made a woman believe a man had more inside him than most. He described his land like he loved it. He described his plans like he believed in them. He never once said anything improper. After 6 months of letters, he asked her to come. She said yes. She arranged for her ailing mother to stay with a cousin. She packed 2 dresses, her Bible, a photograph, and everything she had managed to save, $42, into a carpet bag. She bought a train ticket. She rode 3 days across the country alone. A young woman with nothing but hope and a handful of letters tied together with kitchen string. And now she stood on the platform at Redemption Creek, and Gerald Fitch was not there. The station master, a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers named Holt, had handed her the note with a look that was half pity and half relief that it wasn't his problem. I changed my mind. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket, because she didn't know what else to do with it. The platform slowly emptied. The other passengers peeled away in 2s and 3s, met by family members, by wagons, by the ordinary machinery of lives that were still intact. Trunks were loaded. Children ran. A dog barked at a wheel. Clara didn't move. She was doing the math in her head, the way you do when you're trying not to panic. She had $4.60 left after the train ticket. She didn't know a single soul in Nevada. She had no way to get home, and the truth was, there wasn't much of a home left to go back to. The sun was already thinking about setting, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if she'd been in any condition to notice. A gust of hot wind rolled across the platform and lifted the edge of her skirt. She pressed it down with one hand and stood straighter. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these strangers. But her chin wobbled. Just once. And that was when she heard it. A soft sound. Tiny but real. She turned. Two children were watching her from beside the station wall. They looked to be about 4 years old. A boy and a girl, mirror images of each other, both with dark hair and enormous brown eyes. They were pressed together like two cards in a deck, leaning against a sleeping man in a dusty hat. The little girl was holding a rag doll. She was staring at Clara with the direct, unblinking intensity that only very small children can manage. And then, without any preamble, without any warning at all, the little girl held her rag doll out toward Clara. An offering, or maybe a question. Clara stared at that small, outstretched hand for a long moment. And then the man in the hat stirred. His name was Eli Cross. He was 32 years old, but he looked older, not in his face exactly, but in his eyes. His eyes looked like they had seen too much of the wrong kind of things and not enough of the right kind. They were dark brown, almost black in certain light, and they had a stillness to them that made most people uncomfortable. He was tall, lean the way desert men get lean, not from lack of food but from constant movement, from work that never stopped. His hands were scarred in 2 places on the right, from an accident with a fence wire 3 years ago. His jaw was covered in several days of dark stubble. His boots were good quality but old, resoled once, maybe twice. He had been a rancher outside Redemption Creek for 6 years. He had been a widower for 2 of them. His wife's name had been Anna. She had died of fever in the summer of 1881, 18 months after the twins were born. She had been 24 years old. She had been kind, and funny, and brave, and she had loved those children with everything she had right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. Eli had buried her on a Sunday morning under a juniper tree on the east side of his property. He had stood at that grave for a long time after everyone else went inside. He had said things to the dirt that he never said out loud again. He had gone on. That was what you did. You went on. But going on was not the same as being whole. The twins. The boy was James, the girl was Rose. They were 4 now, all wild hair and loud questions and skinned knees. They were everything good that was left in Eli's world, and he knew it, and the knowing of it sometimes felt like a weight on his chest in the middle of the night. He had come to the station today to collect a shipment of fence posts and wire. Not for himself. For a neighbor, old Bud Callahan, who had busted his hip and couldn't ride. He had not planned to arrive early. He had not planned to let the twins fall asleep against him on the bench while he waited for the freight car to be unloaded. He had not planned any of this. But when he came half awake and saw Rose with her arm extended toward the woman on the platform, that still, pale woman with the crumpled letter and the wobbling chin, something in Eli Cross woke up the rest of the way. He watched the woman for a moment without moving. He was a man who believed in watching before acting. You learn things by watching that you missed if you jumped too fast. He watched her press her skirt down in the wind. He watched her straighten her spine. He watched her fight back whatever was trying to break loose inside her, and win barely but win. He knew that fight. He stood up slowly, careful not to wake James, who was still slumped sideways on the bench, mouth open, entirely unbothered by the universe. He lifted Rose and settled her gently against his chest. She stirred but didn't wake. He walked across the platform toward the woman. She heard his boots and turned. Her eyes were dry. Whatever she'd been fighting, she'd won. For now. She looked at him with the wary, measured look that a woman alone in a strange place gives to a strange man, and he respected that look. He stopped at a respectful distance. He cleared his throat. "You look like someone who could use a cup of coffee and a place to sit that isn't a train platform," he said. His voice was low and quiet. Not gentle exactly, more like still water. "There's a diner across the street. I'm not a threat to you. I'm just a man with 2 sleeping children and a neighbor's fence posts to load." Clara looked at him for a long moment. At his face. At the sleeping child against his shoulder. At his hands, the scar on the right, the roughness of them, the way they held his daughter with such automatic, unconscious care. She looked down at the folded note in her own hand. Then she looked back up at him. "Coffee," she said quietly, "would be fine." The diner was called May's, which Clara noticed and didn't say anything about. It was a narrow, warm room with 6 tables, red-checked curtains on the windows, and the smell of bacon grease and coffee that had been keeping itself warm since morning. A large woman with silver hair and an apron that had seen better decades came over immediately when they walked in. "Eli Cross," she said. "'Bout time you came down from that mountain." She looked at Clara with frank, open curiosity. "And who's this?" "A traveler," Eli said simply. "2 coffees, May. And whatever she has that the children won't destroy." May brought biscuits and honey and 2 cups of black coffee, and she fussed over the twins when James finally woke up and Rose demanded to sit beside Clara immediately and without negotiation. Clara didn't know quite how to handle Rose. She had no siblings. She hadn't been around children much. But Rose seemed entirely unconcerned with whether Clara was comfortable. She climbed up onto the bench beside her, pressed the rag doll into Clara's lap, and announced that the doll's name was Eleanor and that Eleanor had been to Texas. "Has she?" Clara said, somewhat helplessly. "Yes," Rose said, with absolute authority. "She didn't like it." Eli watched this from across the table with something moving quietly in his expression. Something he wasn't ready to name yet. He asked Clara the basic questions, not prying, just the courteous construction of a stranger's situation. Where was she from? Had she come far? Was there someone expecting her in town? She told him the short version. "Ohio. 3 days travel." No, she didn't explain the advertisement or the letters or Gerald Fitch. She just said she had been let down by someone she'd expected to be here. Eli nodded and didn't push. He understood the language of things that hurt too much to explain fully. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Not yet. May rents rooms upstairs," he said. "She's decent and she doesn't overcharge. You'd be safe there." Clara wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The warmth of it helped. She looked out the checked curtain at the darkening street. The horses tied at rails, the men on boardwalks, the last red light draining from the sky over the desert. "What kind of town is Redemption Creek?" she asked quietly. Eli thought about it honestly. "Rough," he said. "Fair enough. Not much law, and what law there is you have to watch. The land's good if you know how to use it. People are real, not polished, but real." She nodded slowly. "Are you planning to stay or planning to leave?" he asked. She looked at the note in her coat pocket. She thought about $42 spent on a train ticket. She thought about her mother in Ohio, dependent on a cousin who was only mildly charitable. She thought about the dry goods store that burned, and all the letters that went unanswered, and the one that had brought her 3 days across America to be told in 4 words that she wasn't worth the trouble. "I don't have much choice at the moment," she said. Eli set down his cup. James, who had been quietly eating a biscuit, looked up at his father with honey on his chin and said, "Pa, is the lady coming home with us?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Eli looked at his son. He looked at his daughter, who had fallen asleep against Clara's arm without asking permission. He looked at Clara, whose whole body had gone carefully still. And then Eli Cross said something that he had not planned to say. Something that came from a place much deeper than his plans. He said it quietly, so quietly it was almost just for her. "My twins need a mother like you." Clara did not say yes. She did not say no either. She said, "You don't know anything about me." And Eli said, "I know enough." She looked at him for a long time. The diner was quiet around them. May had disappeared into the kitchen. The oil lamp on their table pushed a circle of soft gold light against the growing dark outside. "Tell me what you know," Clara said. Not challenging. Genuinely curious. Eli was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man who doesn't have words, but the quiet of a man who is choosing his carefully. "I know you rode 3 days alone on a train," he said. "Most women wouldn't do that. I know someone hurt you bad today and you didn't fall apart on that platform, even when you wanted to. I know my daughter, who does not take to strangers, not ever, fell asleep against your arm like she'd known you her whole life." He paused. "Rose's a good judge of people. Better than me, probably." Clara looked down at the sleeping child. Rose's mouth was slightly open. Her dark lashes lay against her cheekbones like brushstrokes. "This isn't how these things are supposed to work," Clara said carefully. "No," Eli agreed. "It's not. You're a man who just walked up to a woman on a train platform and invited her for coffee. Now you're asking her to come live on your ranch. I'm asking you to consider it," he said. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm not asking you to do anything you don't choose freely. I have a spare room. You'd have your own space, your own privacy. Nothing improper. You'd help with the twins. I'd pay you fair wages for that, same as a housekeeper, better probably. And if it worked, if we got on well, if the arrangement suited both of us, then we could talk about something more permanent." Clara was quiet. "I had a wife," Eli said, his voice dropping even lower. "Her name was Anna. She died 2 years ago. I'm not looking to replace her. That's not what this is. But those children need someone steady. Someone warm. Someone who'll be there when I'm out working, which is most of the time." He looked at his hands on the table. "I'm good with cattle. I'm good with land. I'm not always good with the soft things. The things they need that I don't always know how to give." It was perhaps the most honest thing Clara had ever heard a man say about himself. She looked at James, who had put his head down on his arms and was drifting toward sleep, still sticky with honey, completely at peace. She thought about the 4 words in her pocket. About Gerald Fitch, wherever he was, deciding she wasn't worth it. She thought about Ohio. About the burned store. About the cousin who was already tired of her mother and hadn't tried very hard to hide it. She thought about what it meant to have nothing left to lose. "I'll take the room upstairs tonight," she said finally. "I'll ride out to your ranch tomorrow and see it. I'll make no promises beyond that." Eli nodded. There was nothing in his face that looked like triumph or relief. He looked like a man who was trying very hard not to hope too much. "That's fair," he said. May came out to take the cups and saw all 3 crosses sleeping. James on the table, Rose on Clara's arm, Eli leaning back against the wall with his eyes shut. And she looked at Clara with an expression that was knowing and complicated and tired and hopeful all at once. "He's a good man," May said quietly. "Broken like most of them, but good all the way through." Clara said nothing. She looked out the window at Redemption Creek under the first stars. Somewhere in that darkness, Gerald Fitch was going on with his life, never knowing what he had set in motion. Eli's ranch was called the Double C, named, he told her on the ride out, by the man he had bought it from, and he'd never bothered to change it. It sat about 6 miles north of town in a wide shallow valley between 2 low ridges, and in the early morning light it looked, Clara thought, like something between a hard life and a beautiful one. The house was big but plain. Solid timber, a wide porch, 2 chimneys. A kitchen garden that had been let go at the edges but wasn't entirely lost. A barn painted red that was in better shape than the house, which told her something about where Eli's priorities lay. 2 horses in the corral. A dog of indeterminate breed who came bounding out to meet the wagon like she had been waiting for days for someone worth greeting. The dog's name, she learned, was Biscuit. The dog went immediately to Clara and stayed there. Eli watched this happen with a look she was beginning to recognize on him. That carefully contained look that didn't let too much out, but let a little out around the edges. He showed her the house. It was clean in the way a man's house is clean, the obvious things taken care of, the finer things neglected. The kitchen was functional but cold. The sitting room had good furniture but bare walls. The twins' room was the warmest space in the house. Drawings tacked up, a stuffed bear in the corner, a little rocking horse that had been repaired so many times the repairs had become part of it. The spare room was plain. A bed, a window, a hook on the wall. "It's yours if you want it," he said. She stood in the window and looked out at the valley, the way the morning light came across the ridges in long gold stripes, the way the desert bloomed in the distance with color you didn't expect. "I want it," she said. She stayed. The first week was careful, formal, like 2 strangers learning the grammar of a shared space. Eli rose before dawn and was in the barn or on the range by the time she had breakfast started. She learned quickly what the twins needed. Rose liked her eggs with no yolk touching the white. James would not eat anything green without a specific diplomatic negotiation. Both of them needed stories at night, long ones with animals that talked. She found, to her own surprise, that she was good at the stories. She was also good at the kitchen garden, which she began to pull back from the edge of wildness with quiet, daily work. She was good at the small repairs. A curtain rehung, a shelf righted, a stuck door persuaded. She was good at all the soft things that Eli had said he wasn't. He noticed. He said little, but he noticed everything. At the end of the second week, she was on the porch shelling beans in the afternoon when he came up from the corral and stopped at the steps and said, "You fixed the latch on the kitchen cupboard." "It was bothering me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." It was simple, but it wasn't simple at all. In the third week, trouble rode in. It came in the form of a man named Roy Fitch, Gerald Fitch's older brother. He rode up to the house on a big gray horse on a Thursday afternoon while Eli was out on the far range. Clara was in the kitchen garden with both children when she heard hoofbeats and looked up to find a heavy-set man with mean eyes and a deputy's badge stopping his horse at the gate. He looked at her. He smiled in a way that wasn't a smile. "You must be the mail-order woman," he said. "Gerald's told me about you. Said you showed up anyway even after he called it off. Said you were bothering folks in town." Clara set down her trowel and stood up slowly. She was aware of the twins behind her. She was aware that Eli was 6 miles away. "I live here," she said quietly. "I'm not bothering anyone." Roy Fitch looked at the house, then at her. "That's so," he said. He leaned on his saddle horn. "Well, Redemption Creek is a small town, miss, and a woman who showed up uninvited and moved herself onto a widower's ranch." He shook his head with theatrical regret. "People talk. Let them talk," Clara said. His eyes went hard. "My advice? Move on. For your own good." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked past her at the twins. At Rose, who had her hand wrapped in Clara's skirt. At James, who was staring at Roy Fitch with 4-year-old unblinking directness. Roy Fitch's smile flickered, just for a second. Then he pulled his horse around and rode back down the road. Clara stood very still until he was out of sight. Then she kneeled down and hugged both children for a moment, long enough for her heart to slow down. Then she stood up and went inside to figure out what she was going to do. She told Eli that evening. She told him all of it, plainly and without drama, while he stood at the kitchen sink washing the day off his hands. She told him Roy Fitch had come, what he said, the way he'd looked at the children. Eli's jaw tightened. He dried his hands. He turned around. "He's a bully and a bad deputy," he said. "He works for Gerald. Anything Gerald wants done and doesn't want to do himself, Roy does it." "Why would Gerald care if I'm here?" Clara asked. Eli looked at her steadily. "Because Gerald Fitch has wanted this land for 3 years. He's made offers. I've turned them down. And he knows," he paused. "He knows if I have help, if there's someone steady here with the twins, I can hold this ranch long term. Without help, eventually I might get worn down enough to sell." Clara understood. "So he called off the engagement," she said slowly, "to leave me stranded. And then he sends his brother here to scare me off." "That's my thinking," Eli said. "That's a lot of trouble for a ranch." "This valley is worth a lot of trouble," he said simply. "But it was always mine to give or keep. Nobody's taking it." The quiet that followed had a different quality to it than the previous quiets. It was heavier, more decided. Clara thought about what she was about to say before she said it. "I'm not leaving," she said. Something shifted in Eli's face. "Clara? I'm not leaving because Roy Fitch rode up my road and tried to frighten me," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm not leaving because Gerald Fitch is a coward who couldn't even say it to my face. I'm not leaving because some men in some town are talking." She paused. "But I need to know something first." He waited. "Do you actually want me here?" she asked. "Not as help with the children. Not because it's convenient for the ranch. Do you want me here?" The kitchen was very quiet. A log shifted in the stove. Outside, the desert wind moved across the porch. Eli Cross looked at this woman. who had ridden 3 days alone to a strange place, who had stood up to a bully deputy without flinching, who fixed latches and told long animal stories and had a winter sky gaze that saw things clearly, and he stopped doing what he was usually very good at doing, which was holding himself carefully back from the edge of things. Yes, he said, just that. Just the word, clean and unadorned, the way he said everything important. Then Roy Fitch came back. Not the next day. 3 days later. And this time he brought 2 other men and no badge, and he came after dark, and he came to the barn. Eli smelled the smoke first. He was out of bed and through the kitchen before Clara even woke, and by the time she got to the porch with the children behind her, the barn was burning at one corner and Eli was already pulling the horses clear. What happened next lasted about 4 minutes but felt much longer. Roy Fitch and his 2 companions came from the shadow of the tree line. Roy had a rifle. The other 2 had the loose, casual posture of men who expected no real resistance. What they did not expect was Clara. She had come through the kitchen, and she had taken, from above the kitchen door, the shotgun that hung there, that Eli had shown her in her second week because he said every person on this ranch should know where it was. She had loaded it with the shells in the drawer below. She had walked out onto that porch with both barrels ready and the twins behind her inside the door, and she had said, in a voice that did not shake, "Roy Fitch, get off this land." Roy turned and looked at her, at the gun, at the absolute stillness in her face. He laughed, started to say something. She fired 1 barrel into the air. The sound of it rolled across the valley like a thunderclap and came back from the ridges as an echo. The horses went wild. The 2 companions swore and grabbed for their animals. Roy Fitch's big gray horse reared and nearly threw him. "The second one's aimed," Clara said. Roy Fitch, for the first time in a life spent frightening people smaller than himself, looked uncertain. Eli had the fire under control by then. It hadn't spread far, caught at one wall only, and he had the well bucket already working. He looked across the yard at Clara on the porch and the 3 men on their skittish horses, and he straightened up. He didn't say anything. He just walked across the yard slowly, stood beside the porch steps, and crossed his arms and waited. Roy looked at both of them, at the woman with the shotgun, at the man who wasn't afraid of him, at the valley that was not going to be taken from either of them tonight. He pulled his horse around. His 2 companions were already gone. He rode into the dark and didn't look back. Clara lowered the gun. Her hands were shaking now, just a little. Eli came up the steps. He stood in front of her. He took the shotgun gently from her hands. He set it down. And then, for the first time, Eli Cross put his arms around another person the way a man does when he is not being careful anymore. She let him. Behind the door, Rose's voice said, very seriously, to James, "I told you she was good." Roy Fitch was removed as deputy 6 weeks later. The sheriff, a slow-moving, sharp-eyed man named Garrett who had been watching Roy for longer than most knew, had what he needed after 3 witnesses from the tree line road confirmed seeing the 3 men ride toward the Cross Ranch that night. Roy left Redemption Creek without making much noise about it. Gerald Fitch sold his ranch within the year and moved to California, or so the story went. Nobody missed either of them. Clara May Sutton and Eli Cross were married on a Saturday in November, in the little church at the north end of town, in front of about 30 people including May from the diner and old Bud Callahan on his healing hip and a dog named Biscuit who was not technically invited but came anyway. Rose wore a white dress and carried Eleanor the rag doll and took the whole ceremony very seriously. James ate something from his pocket throughout and refused to be questioned about it. The kitchen garden at the Double C came back fully the following spring. Eli built a second room onto the house that summer, and a proper fence that winter, and the valley settled into the shape of a life that was hard and real and full of the right kind of things. Clara wrote to her mother every week. Enough money to move her from the cousin's house by spring. Enough money to bring her west by fall. The first night her mother sat on that porch and watched the Nevada sky go dark. She took Clara's hand and held it. "You found something good," her mother said. "I didn't go looking for it," Clara said. Her mother smiled. "The best things usually don't wait for you to go looking." There is a photograph taken of them years later, Eli and Clara and the twins, all grown, standing in front of the double C in the late afternoon light. Eli has one arm around Clara's shoulders. Clara is looking not at the camera but at something out of frame, something that made her smile in that slow, private way. The twins are laughing at something neither of them is sharing. Biscuit is asleep at their feet. It is an ordinary photograph, just a family on a porch in Nevada. But if you look at it long enough, if you let your eyes stay on it, you start to feel the weight of everything that had to break before that moment was possible. The burned store and the sick mother and the 3-day train ride. The 4 words on a scrap of paper. The woman who stood on the platform and decided, without knowing it, without planning it, not to fall down. The cowboy who saw her from across the station and recognized something. It didn't start with love. It started with coffee and a sleeping child, and a man who was honest enough to say, "I'm not always good with the soft things." It started with 2 people who had both been left with nothing, choosing slowly and carefully and for real to build something instead. And out there in Redemption Creek, in the valley between 2 ridges, in the house with the red barn and the kitchen garden, it turned out that something was everything. What would you have done in her place, stayed or gone back? Drop your answer below. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today.